G'day and welcome. Another video. Lesson 8 today. We are looking at education as an SVR, socially valued resource. Don't forget though, always highlight and date lesson 8 and we'll get to it. Now, at sea and education. So we always start each lesson here with a recap here about why education is an important socially valued resource and which human right it relates to. And you'll notice with each of these human implication tables, the first sentence and first point I always put is a human rights of use. So whenever you're asked a question about any SVR ever in the HSC, maybe in an assessment task, it's always a good idea to have a pure paragraph on the breach of human rights as an issue of access to SVR if it's asking about social exclusion. Okay, so whenever you're talking about the implications in relation to life chances, life course, maybe social mobility, whatever it might be, you can generally always typically link the SVR. We have a visitor. Here he comes. Oh, no, he's been picked up. Oh, there he is. Hello. Hello. Do you want to say hi? You want to say hi? You got to talk in here. You want to talk? Ow. Oh. Right. Apologies. Yes, so human rights is always a really important thing to know, and that's why we're recapping it every time there as well. Okay, getting started. Now, an overview of education. It is, as you know, I'm a big fan. It's one of the most important indicators of social inclusion and success in life for people. So if you're talking about positive life outcomes, having a good high life course, as well as having really good social mobility, education is the most important in that regard. People who are educated, all the stats show they live longer, they have better mental health scores, earn much higher amounts of money. Their incomes and salaries are significantly higher due to the increased qualifications. This is generally speaking. I'm not saying you can't be rich if you don't have a degree, but it certainly helps. And then increased social status as well, due to greater social mobility. Okay, so if you're holding a job which has a qualification, specifically a tertiary qualification, your social status is higher. But the big one here for me, if you highlight this, social mobility, greater social mobility, the idea to vertically move up classes within society, whether that's like we're talking about the social status vertical column, or if you go to the income vertical column on social class, so whether you're low SES, middle or high SES, it really depends on your job. So those really core social mobility factors are really underpinned by education. Very important. In Australia, our country currently, completing Year 12 and attaining tertiary education qualifications is a requirement for most of the vital professions that promote social inclusion as well. So you think your doctors, I'm going to add nurses here as well, teachers and social workers. So they'll require a degree. A lot of other things that promote social inclusion as well is a barrister, which is a lawyer. So people who are fighting in the justice system there as well. So a lot of these and other healthcare workers as well, physiotherapists, OTs, all of them require additional tertiary qualifications. So really important in helping other people achieve social inclusion, not just for your own social inclusion in terms of the better job you get, the better pay you get, but if you are a doctor, nurse, barrister, lawyer, teacher, social worker, you are impacting and improving the social inclusion and life chances of other people every day throughout your work. So that's and if you weren't highly educated, you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's really important to note there as well. So if we look at comparing some stats here between Aboriginal Australians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, here I've got 3 indicators around education that are typically the ones the government uses to measure success. One is attendance. 2 is completion of Year 12 or attaining your HSC. And then 3 is your literacy and numeracy levels. Okay, how well you can read and write. And do problem solving in terms of numbers. So attendance here is one of the most... Hello, are you coming again? It's okay, let him come. He was a big hit last week. So this makes people watch the videos more. I'm all for it. Oh, here he goes. Oh, and Bondi's joining us too. Hello. Da da da. Sorry, I'll get out of the way. You can't see him. Alright, he's just going to chill there. So yeah, so the attendance rate between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as you can see, non-Indigenous is significantly higher. Now this is across the whole of the country, and this is a stat here, 97%. I personally am not in agreement with, but that's according to the government's website. So take of that what you will. Apparently 90% of non-Indigenous students Australia-wide attend school. That is a stat you can use because it is verified by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, but I'm just sceptical based on my own experience of that. Oh, hello. Oh, look at him. There he is. Hello. You come to learn about education? Patrick's a big fan. You read every night, don't you? Yes. No, no. You shake your head, Patrick? You shake your head? Oh, don't pull cords. Alright. Yeah, bye, buddy. So yeah, so 97%, not sure of that, but that is the stat we have from the government, so that's the one we're going to go with. If you compare that to Indigenous, now this is the K-12 stat, is 82%, which doesn't sound too bad, but when you look at the high school stat, it's nearly half. It's nearly half of 100%, that is. So 57% for high school. So attendance in terms of Aboriginal students in schools, K-12, it's really good from kindergarten up until about Year 3. It's almost identical to non-Indigenous. Year 3 onwards is like Year 4, 5 and 6 is where it starts to drop a bit. Then there's a significant drop in Year 7, and then a massive drop in Year 10, and then the biggest drop in Year 12, which we see if only 57% are attending in high school and only 32% are completing Year 12, I would say roughly only 30% are attending in those senior years, Year 11 and 12 there. So if you add the factor of rural and remote, which makes every SVR, every social exclusion factor quadruple or triple, only 21% of students, this is K-12, attend rural and remote schools every single day. So this, and I've written in brackets here, the most common reasons for this absence is due to school closures with not enough staffing. So out west it's very hard to staff teaching jobs. And if you go back to here, up a little bit, where we see that 14% plus 7, so about 22% of students live in rural or very remote areas. If we add rural in here, we've got almost half living in rural or very remote. You can see where that staffing becomes an issue, whereas here it's only about 10%. So 10% to 50% roughly here. We're even struggling here in our kind of major city area of the Central Coast to find teachers, so I can't imagine how hard it is out there. So that number's probably going to get worse in a few years. But moral of the story is that non-Indigenous have significantly higher attendance rates than Indigenous students. If we look at Year 12 completion, close to 90% here for non-Indigenous, whereas we have 32% for Indigenous. That's huge. You guys remember that reading in Lesson 1 where we looked at life outcomes. If you do not finish Year 12, across every metric it drops a lot. You are like 5 times more likely to have health issues, in relation to healthcare. You're more likely to, your life expectancy goes down, your income goes down. Every metric goes down and crashes if you don't finish Year 12. And so we have Indigenous people, about 32% are the only finishing. So that's a majority. That's 68% not finishing Year 12. You're more likely as an Aboriginal person to go to jail than you are to finish school. It's huge. So that's a big area of social exclusion. We then look at literacy and numeracy. Now this is in terms of reading, achieving the minimum standard they expect by year 9. This isn't HSC minimum standards. This is your basic skills minimum standards. So the idea is that if you can complete year 9 literacy and numeracy, you should be able to read a tax form, do your basic day-to-day sort of skills, read pamphlets and that sort of stuff. 74% of Indigenous people hit that target, and 95% of non-Indigenous people hit that target. Again, big gap there of 21%. So across every education metric, or not every, the 3 most important ones, I guess, that the government typically looks at in terms of social inclusion is, as you would expect, behind in every single area. Now, the implications that this has. Think of each of these dot points like I don't know, you might even want to write this on the side here somewhere. That each of these dot points are almost like a peel paragraph that you can use. So if you get a 15-mark question just on education alone, your chockers there. If you get a 15-mark question, we know from experience they always pair them. So you've always got at least another example up your sleeve, no matter which 2 they pair you with. As you can see, I've got a lot of examples there for you. So with education, there are 4 main implications that I can see in relation to life chances for Aboriginal people. First and always is the human rights abuse. So human rights abuse 26. So 26 states that everyone has a right to education and that education should be equally accessible to all. Highlight that. Equally accessible to all. Is it equally accessible for Aboriginal people, full stop? No. Is it equally accessible for people in rural and remote areas? Definitely not. So we can see already that there's a human rights abuse or breach which is impacting their life course. So ATSE students also on top of this have disproportionate attendance rates, lower literacy and numeracy scores and lower educational attainment, whether that's tertiary education in university or finishing in year 12. And then you add on to this fact that many Aboriginal students in rural and remote areas, about 50% of the ATSE population live in rural and remote, and they do not have access to education due to the complex issues of school closures and staffing implications. But also, if you could add to the side here, colonisation as an issue. Colonisation, write it down. And what I mean by this, I don't know if you want to draw an arrow up here, it's that idea of that we looked at in sitcoms, that idea of cultural imperialism. If you look at the Aboriginal culture and traditional Aboriginal culture, it is not very alike Western culture. Our school system and education system is built on a Western cultural lens by the British Empire. And so that idea of sitting in rows at school, learning with a lot of bookwork, writing, reading, literacy and numeracy, because that's how we need to function and survive in our world, it's very different to the world of Aboriginal people that they were used to for 60,000 odd years. So in a very short time, in a matter of 250 years or so, all of that's been flipped on its head. And so of course already they're at a disadvantage. So if we're talking about equity and equality again, equality, sure, they got the same opportunity, but they're starting way down here when everyone else is starting up here. Everyone else's culture's up to speed, whereas the cultural imbalance and gap here is still very, very large. So that's a big issue there in relation to education and implications for life course and social exclusion impacts. Second point is poor education results for ATSE students. That's creating a skill gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. As the employment industry, they will hire the most suitable person for the job. If that person has more experience, if they have tertiary education qualifications, they're more likely to get the job. So the skill gap here makes that gap even bigger and bigger. So you can see how it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Is that most professional jobs these days require a tertiary education. You don't get that typically straight away unless you finish year 12. There are other avenues to get it. But if you're someone who's leaving school in year 10, year 9, year 8, chances are your acceptance to get into that university program is going to be a lot harder. And even if you do, there's some good government incentives out there to try and help get and close the gap and get more Aboriginal people into universities. If your literacy and numeracy scores are so low, you can see how that would be very challenging to get into a university once you're there to succeed and thrive, because it's still based off a very similar system to school. in its Western cultural lens, its lectures, its tutorials, very similar to what we're doing now. So that skill gap is getting bigger and bigger as we go, and that's an implication, because we know, again, if you're more educated, you live longer, have better mental health scores, etc. Which is my last point here, actually, but I'll get to that in a second. Third point: through a lack of education due to attendance and lower literacy and numeracy levels, Aboriginal individuals are more likely to experience social exclusion, as they would have difficulty doing any of the following: understanding social concepts in general, because say if you're finishing, one of the jobs we have here at school I've talked to you guys about is that hidden curriculum. If you want to write that on the side here, hidden curriculum. It's that idea of, yeah, we teach you syllabus dot points, but we also teach you manners, how to line up, treat people in authority with respect, how to engage positively with your peers, the concepts of communication, teamwork, how to actually write an essay, how to articulate your thoughts, how to think critically. All of that's taught to you. And so if you're leaving school earlier, you're going to have trouble understanding a lot of those social concepts that school is expected to teach you inexplicitly. So that's one issue. Engaging in public discourse is another. So discourse means, I think I said this in another video, but any form of, I don't know if you want to write above here, written, verbal / communication. So public discourse is any kind of engagement in ideas within the public. So let's say there's an issue, your bins weren't, collected. You can write to council, you can call council, something low level like that. But then something higher up, say you want to participate in a debate. Let's say you want to go to Q&A live or whatever it is. If you're more educated, you're going to be able to understand the issues and concepts surrounding those key issues that the public discourse is talking about, whether that's climate change, whether it's royal commissions into aged care, or any other big topics that have been dominating the news cycle lately. Even other simple things like writing job applications, consuming the news and other information from government. All of this, if you have low literacy and numeracy, and indeed lower attendance at school, you're going to be missing those important lessons. They have a really big impact long term, and so you won't be able to participate as equally in society than if you were to stay and finish school there. And last point, sorry, my mic keeps making this weird noise. Last one is people who are educated, on average, they live longer, have better mental health scores, earn higher incomes, and have greater social status due to greater social mobility. Pretty much put that sentence in because it's true. So these poorer education standards that you can see, and the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, is going to create a lot of significant social exclusion in these areas. So again, we see here how lack of a social inclusion in one SVR affects a lot of the other SVRs, like we saw in the justice system, in terms of if you're in juvie, education's probably not going to be great. If you're in juvie, as a fact, your health isn't as good as it could be. So it's the same with education. People who finish year 12, go to uni, typically have better mental health scores, earn more money, etc. So stay in school, kids, but we can see here the big gap there. So that's Aboriginal, Indigenous and non-Indigenous education as our syllabus stop point, and they're looking at that SVR. See you in the next one.